The old house on Hemlock Lane had always been a fixture in the town of Sparrow Creek, as much a part of the landscape as the weeping willows that lined the river. It was called Blackwood Manor, though no one remembered who Blackwood was. For as long as anyone could remember, it had belonged to the reclusive Ashworth family. The last of them, Elara Ashworth, had passed away a month ago, leaving the house and its secrets to her estranged niece, Clara. Clara arrived on a Tuesday, the sky a flat, gray sheet that threatened rain. The taxi dropped her at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, the iron gates groaning like a tired old man as she pushed them open. The house loomed at the end of the drive, a 3-story Victorian behemoth with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. It looked less like a home and more like a forgotten memory. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, but also something else, lavender and old paper. Sunlight struggled through the grime on a single uncovered window in the grand foyer, illuminating dancing dust motes. A grand staircase swept upwards into the shadows. Clara felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. She wasn't here to grieve a woman she barely knew. She was here to sell the house and get back to her life in the city. At least, that was the plan. Her first task was sorting through her aunt's belongings. The study was a hoarder's paradise of books, papers, and peculiar artifacts. Tucked away in a dusty roll-top desk, beneath a pile of unpaid bills, Clara found a small, leather-bound journal. The first entry was dated 50 years ago. It was her Aunt Elara's handwriting, but the script was youthful, hopeful. The early pages were filled with mundane details of small-town life, but then, the tone shifted. "He's watching the house again," one entry read. "I see him from my window, standing by the old oak tree. The sheriff says it's just old Mr. Abernathy on his evening walk, but Mr. Abernathy has been gone for years." Clara's heart did a little jump. She glanced nervously out the study window at the gnarled oak tree on the edge of the property. There was no one there, of course, there wasn't. It was just an old woman's rambling. She continued reading. The journal spoke of whispers in the walls, of objects moving on their own, and of a recurring dream about a locked room in the attic. Elara had become convinced the house was hiding something. She wrote about a town secret, a disappearance that had been swept under the rug decades ago, a young artist named Julian who had vanished without a trace. The official story was that he'd simply left town, chasing a bigger dream, but Elara didn't believe it. She believed he'd met a terrible fate, and that the house knew what happened. The next day, Clara went into town for supplies. Sparrow Creek was quaint, almost unnervingly so. The people were polite, but their smiles never quite reached their eyes. When she mentioned she was staying at Blackwood Manor, a hush would fall over the conversation. At the local diner, the owner, a stout woman named Mildred, polished a glass with a little too much vigor. Elara was a character, Mildred said carefully. Kept to herself, said the house had bad bones. Bad bones? Clara asked. Old stories. Every old town has them. Mildred's eyes flickered towards the door, as if expecting someone. Some stories are best left buried. That afternoon, driven by a curiosity that was fast eclipsing her desire to sell, Clara decided to find the locked room from her aunt's journal. The attic was a labyrinth of forgotten furniture draped in white sheets, like a graveyard for a past life. At the far end, behind a towering wardrobe, was a small, solid oak door with no handle and an old, rusted keyhole. There was no key on her aunt's keyring that fit. Frustrated, she returned to the study and the journal. A later entry gave her a clue. The key is not a key. The raven sees all. Clara looked around the room. On the mantelpiece, among a collection of porcelain birds, sat a single, black-painted raven. It was heavy, made of iron. When she picked it up, she felt something rattle inside. A small twist at its base revealed a hidden compartment. Inside was a strangely shaped piece of metal. It wasn't a key, but a lever. Back in the attic, she inserted the lever into the keyhole. With a firm push, there was a loud clunk, and the door swung inward. The room was small, barely a closet. It was empty, save for a single wooden chest in the center. It wasn't locked. With trembling hands, Clara lifted the heavy lid. Inside, it was filled with painting canvases, all wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped the first one. It was a portrait of a young woman with fiery red hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. It was her Aunt Elara, but she looked vibrant, alive, and happy. The artist's signature at the bottom read, Julian. She unwrapped another. It was a landscape of Sparrow Creek, but the colors were vivid, intense, unlike the muted town Clara had seen. Each painting was a masterpiece, filled with a life that Sparrow Creek seemed to lack. At the very bottom of the chest, she found another journal. This one belonged to Julian. His entries detailed a passionate, secret love affair with Alara Ashworth. The town, and especially Alara's stern father, disapproved. They were planning to run away together. The final entry was frantic. Her father knows. He came to the house tonight. He said he'd rather see her locked away than leave with me. He's a monster. I'm hiding these paintings in the attic. If something happens to me, I want the world to know how much I loved her. I can hear him coming back up the stairs. The entry ended there. Clara sat back, the dust motes dancing around her in the dim light. The whispers in the walls, the secrets, the disappearance. It all clicked into place. This wasn't a ghost story. It was a story of love and tragedy. Alara hadn't been a crazy old woman. She was a heartbroken one, trapped in the house that held the last remnants of her lost love, haunted not by a spirit, but by a memory. She went to find Sheriff Brody, a man whose family had been in local law enforcement for generations. She showed him the journals and the paintings. He looked tired, his face etched with the weight of old secrets. My grandfather was the sheriff back then, he said softly. He was friends with the Ashworths. He always said the Julian case was complicated. This fills in the blanks. He pointed to a passage in Julian's journal. He mentions a loose floorboard in the cellar. They returned to Blackwood Manor. The cellar was damp and smelled of earth. Under an old wine rack, they found a single floorboard that was slightly askew. When they pried it up, they found a small, rotted wooden box. Inside was a tarnished silver locket. Clara opened it. On one side was a tiny, faded picture of young Alara, on the other, a picture of Julian. There was no body, no dramatic confession, just this final, heartbreaking proof of a life cut short. Alara's father had likely threatened Julian, forced him to leave, and then spent the rest of his life ensuring his daughter never left Sparrow Creek, keeping her a prisoner in her own home. Alara, in her grief, had created a haunting to cope with the truth. Clara decided not to sell the house. Instead, she opened it up. She held an exhibition of Julian's paintings right there in the grand foyer of Blackwood Manor. The whole town came. They saw the vibrant colors, the passion, the life that had been hidden away for so long. They saw the portrait of the young, happy Alara, and for the first time, they understood her. The whispers in Sparrow Creek didn't stop, but they changed. They were no longer about the crazy woman on Hemlock Lane. They were about the lost artist and the girl who loved him. The house no longer felt heavy with secrets, but full of a sad, beautiful story. Clara found she didn't want to go back to the city. She had found a piece of her family, a piece of herself, in the dusty old house. Blackwood Manor was finally at peace, and in a way, so was she.